Hey, I'm Elise Wagner, and I'm here at my show at Butters Gallery in Portland, Oregon, Climate Charts. And I'm gonna kind of just go over the work and how it all manifested. I was really inspired by this, to make this body of work by this film called Chasing Ice by James Balog. And the images of the receding glaciers were so riveting to me. They ended up being an influence in my work. So this is the first piece that I started with, and it's called Glacier Stream. And the term that I used for this, I called it Glacier Stream because it's a specific thing that occurs in glaciation. Warming starts to begin with the glaciation, that it creates this stream, and that's what ultimately leads to glacial calving, is what they call it. This is kind of a study in color and texture and really trying to get a sense of the paradox of materials I was working with, which was basically using hot molten wax to create glacial ice. And so I kind of use this as I call it my incubator piece, or the piece where all the meditation of what is to come occurs in this piece. So it's a very important piece, and it's divided in these kind of vertical rectangles, and that is what influenced some of the other sizes of the work that you'll see in a minute. The texture here is made from a technique that I do where I trap the air in the wax. So I work with a lot of alchemy, and I work with the materials themselves being hot and knowing when to, when it's cool enough to go back in. And so there's a real duality going on between my actual materials and the theme of global warming. This is my Glacier Chart series, where I made these graphite rubbings of the texture of the painting. And then I transferred it onto a wax surface. And again, going with that kind of like the verticality that you see in the composition of the other piece, I took that shape and I made all these individual pieces. This is kind of exploring the colors of what it is like at the base of a glacier. And I really took some time to get the color exact so that you could kind of almost imagine what it would be like to be at the base of that glacier and maybe even underneath it. I mounted the graphite rubbing onto the warm wax panel, and I wasn't sure what I was going to get, but I was pretty excited that I was repurposing the texture of my painting into another painting. So birthing another body of work from what existed before. And I think that again, like, artists don't always know what to do or if they're making any difference with climate change. There's nothing that we can really physically do to help it except, just by our choices in life and how we try to be practical. Just do whatever we can to feel like we are not leaving a very big footprint. So I do that in my studio practice, and I'm always doing that with the actual work, where I'm repurposing it, I'm bringing it forward, I'm using remnants from my studio, or I'm using the texture of my paintings to make rubbings from, and then bringing it forward into new work. I'm kind of referencing, I'm self-referencing through my work, and I'm also kind of taking the surface to the fullest. There's a selfish aspect of it for me too, where I want to keep a little piece of my painting before it goes out the door. So I've been in the habit of making these graphite rubbings. And so these are some of the actual graphite rubbings that you see in these pieces. And this is one that you get a clear example. It ripped a little bit in the process. But you can see how I rubbed it on there. This is on tracing paper. What I'll do is I'll go around to different areas of the paintings where I think I'm going to get a good texture, and I'll go ahead and just give it a little rub-a-dub. And I'll keep them, and sometimes I'll use them. And in this case, I just decided to do a whole series of them. From here, I decided to make a 12-part series of larger paintings, and I started with Glacier Atlas 1. Okay, these three are Glacier Charts 13, 14, and 15, and these came right after I did the 12-piece Glacier Charts series. They are also the graphite rubbings, but then I kind of worked in a little bit of a topographical linear element with these, and I worked a little bit more on kind of perfecting the glaze and getting this oil glaze that I do over them, to the point where the light blue combined with the glaze really gives it the feeling or the look of glass, and it's not. It's wax and the graphite rubbing with an oil galcid glaze over the whole thing with a little bit of metallic pigment in it. And these, I really wanted to kind of showcase the edges, so I went ahead and framed those as well to go with the other 12-part series. And then I was done with the smaller works for these, and I really think I had the concept for the larger series. This is Glacier Atlas 1, and what I did was I sized these up about 5 times the size of the smaller ones, and they're 42 by 55 each. And with this one, I really just wanted to create a topographical feel to it, as if you're descending down into a vast crevasse of ice and water. And I did this through this same method that I've developed with encaustic, where I trap air in the wax, and I pretty much rely on chance occurrences in the materials, and then that's when the dialogue begins with the work. And so some of these shapes and formations of air are what kind of comprise the topography of this, and really creates that, like, this environment, this unknown environment, or an environment onto itself. And the color was really important to me, like just getting the color just right. Cobalt turquoise surface. There's no other color on here except a little bit of pearl white. And a lot of the time people are like, don't touch it, don't put any oil paint on it, you're gonna ruin it, or it's not gonna be the same. But when I put the oil paint on there, that's when the surface comes out and kind of says hello. A lot of the time I'm working fairly blindly in my process, and it's when I put the oil paint on there that it really just pops out. And I use very little oil paint, and I use it very sparingly, just to kind of bring out what's already there. This piece is Glacier Atlas 2. With this one, it changed a little bit, where I was getting more into creating more of a landscape feel of glacier versus glacial water, or glacier streams. And I did a wash of graphite oil paint over it to kind of bring out, again, when you're working white into white with wax, with molten wax, it's really hard to see what you're doing. And so I layered the white up, and then I got it to a point that I really liked it, and I took a graphite oil stick and I put it over the entire surface and brought out some of these subtleties of the texture. When I was making this one, the news of the largest iceberg in history broke off of the southern tip of Antarctica. I had been following the Larsen C ice shelf, which was basically a 2-mile long crack in the ice, and it was threatening to break off. And then it did in July when I was working on this painting. They were describing it as, a metric trillion ton iceberg, the biggest of its kind, the size of the state of Delaware. It wasn't the shape of it, but I kind of went to that shape for inspiration. So I started looking at the shape of Delaware, and I drew it in my journal, and then I went in the studio, and I was kind of compositionally struggling with this one. Much to my surprise, I drew the map of Delaware, and it kind of looked like Delaware in a very subtle way. Here I just added an element of, more glacial water kind of moving in to create a little bit of tension. Like, I really wanted it to feel like there was tension and that things were getting pushed out by heat and by the warming of the ocean waters. And then I added this red here, and that's also kind of a symbol of the heat and the hot with the cool elements. And so, okay, this one is called Glacier Stream 2, and it's the last piece of the show. It was the final piece out of 29 pieces that I completed for the show, and it kind of comes full circle from Glacier Stream 1. In that so much information had passed and so much news of climate change had come between all of the different, the many hurricanes and storms that we had been encountering and the ice shelf breaking off. This piece was pivotal in that I was really interpreting that, and it was starting to really come out. It was coming into my consciousness and ending up on the painting. And with this, I wanted to keep it light. I wanted to really keep it white, and I wanted to keep the blues really translucent and give this effect of like this, you're looking down at the stream. And so I devised like these kind of, these intersections, or these almost intersections, but really feeling like a break or a departure, a separation. I did a lot of linear work way underneath the surface to kind of show how things are constantly moving and shifting and pushing things up and around. And so I wanted to create some symbol of movement from those underlines. My work is very cartographic, and it's not an accident, and I definitely like to draw myself an abstract map underneath when I'm starting to layer up in my work. And so that's the way under layers, and then I layered the work up and up and up, and I continued, doing my air trapping. In this particular part of it, I really wanted to get a sense of, this kind of receding, so I did layers, and it was very conscious of me compositionally to kind of create one layer and then this layer and then this layer, and I would have to negotiate in my mind how I was going to translate. How am I going to make this wax look like ice? How am I going to do that? And I actually discovered that actual thing when we experienced an ice storm in Portland, where I'm based. We had this crippling ice storm, and I was walking my dog and trying not to fall down, and I saw the water trapped under a thin layer of ice, and I took a picture of it. I was so compelled by this because it looked so much like my graphite transfers, and it looked so much like what every piece led up to now was, that I took this image of it and I realized I'm trying to replicate nature, and it's happening in my work. Like, there's this symbiosis happening between making my work with hot wax and trying to turn it into glacial ice. That paradox just kept coming back and repeating itself throughout the whole making of this show. It was a real process of elimination and a real digging deep and a real sincere attempt at creating ice with hot wax.